Doing okay, yeah. So this is kind of let's say kickoff meeting for the group. Let me just share my screen with you guys. Um, where is? 1 second here. Sorry, one of my windows got lost. Where is it? There we go. Sorry, Zoom took over my windows. um, so welcome to Security kind of token crypto asset group. We flagged this one as like a working group. So if you guys haven't been in on any of the other kind of group meetings or read through the community stuff or just talk to me or whatever. So basically, we kind of have the split between what we call special interest groups, a SIG, and then a working group. And the SIGs are kind of considered like permanent and existing forever and kind of focused on one or more core tech efforts. And then the working groups, they might live for a long time, but they're assumed that at some point they will end after meeting some goal. That could be delivering particular effort or a library, or it could just be something that spans multiple interest groups. So right now we only have a couple. So the kind of crypto asset security token, this one is one of them. The other one is Apostle. And so they are the first two working groups, and we view them as not that this one won't is only going to exist for a few months, but whether it's 6 months or a year or whatever, um, it kind of overarches the API, the SDK, and everything. So anyway, so that's kind of high level structure from like an intro perspective. And there's obviously been discussions and effort. I mean, some of this stuff dates back to actually almost over a year ago, both on the feature and discussion set, right? So some of the stuff that Tech Bureau was doing and getting into in the security token space, both for customers and just for the company itself. Obviously, we'll talk a little bit about the verified token framework later. And then I think it was last April or May is when we kind of started introducing and talking about the metadata functionality. And we've kind of been pushing that metadata functionality out as we've been, it's been more conversational from a design perspective. So we have felt that it's kind of going to, not just for this effort, for a lot of efforts, the metadata functionality is going to kind of open up a lot of new tools and design patterns. And so any sort of regulated or managed crypto assets, security or not security, right, is going to probably leverage some aspect of it. So we're kind of using it to drive some of those features. So I guess any questions before we kind of just jump in? We'll kind of jump into the metadata stuff first, and then
I have one.
Yeah.
This is Jeff. I was reading Gimmer's post on GitHub the other day, and he basically said that metadata is not going to be able to control rules. So, like, my vision was always you put a little metadata on here, and then it can affect this or it can affect that. It seemed like Gimmer's post was basically metadata is just metadata. It's just messages, right, and data. So I was
So currently, as it stands, that's what it is. That's what it's scoped as, right? And that's kind of part of the improvement proposal is kind of bringing up other use cases of it. So the general idea of actually, so why don't we just go ahead and jump right in? So let me just open up a new window with this since we're kind of talking about it. And so essentially, just to give some background, so like some of the first basic ideas were essentially, hey, people are kind of using and abusing the tools at hand. So how do we kind of give them more tools, right? So there's some core new features in V2 and Catapult, but there's still kind of, let's say, restrictions, at least on like a very simple example is creating a data model for an asset, right? So certain, not so much on the public chain side, but on the private chain side, and enterprise side, people either in Hyperledger or the like will create like schemaed essential like objects with properties, right? So essentially, those are just key value pairs. So we started kind of talking about those. Then we said, hey, where would those hang off of, right? If you have assets and you have accounts, that's kind of another type of asset in a way, the way the system manages things. And so the conversation's kind of grown from there. And then we kind of reflected it back on different efforts and then having different people provide input. So one of those lenses that have been kind of reflected back on, dating back to whatever, let's say 4 months or something, or maybe even actually longer now since we're getting into March, is asset, security tokens, regulated assets. And in the first design of introducing those, which is, let's say that's kind of like the current state of things, it's still set up as a mindset of like metadata itself isn't doing anything. It's just providing name value attribute tagging. And here are the objects that we want to assign it to. So currently we have like, okay, let's look towards adding it to accounts, assets, namespaces, and transactions. Let's figure out, some sizing limits. Some of the biggest things are about like expiration. Whether, you can obviously enforce an expiration just like some of the other functionality in the system has. Be like, hey, expire this on block XYZ. Other stuff maybe lives forever if they choose to do so. And then this kind of, audit history and pruning. And so this is kind of the level of the discussion now, besides some access control about, hey, if I, like one of the early questions that came up is, I don't want people spamming my accounts. Actually, this came up on the other group as well, because this metadata is kind of spanning multiple efforts and inputs. So like, hey, metadata sounds cool, but why should people be able to just like spam and tag my account? And then it all comes down to kind of, I guess, your point, Jeff, of like, well, if we want to leverage metadata for some like control and logic within how assets are owned or not owned or restricted, you have to be able to have unfettered access to tag any account. And as the asset owner, I should be able to tag your account and then say, hey, if I apply this tag to you, the system will prevent you from like, receiving this from someone else out of my control or something, right? And so there's been no specific design yet. You've seen it referred to programmable mosaics, like Jag kind of brought it up in terms of that in some other threads. So potentially it would maybe be, metadata itself isn't doing much. It's just adding metadata to the assets and the accounts and whatnot. And then it's other functionality that might go into, quote unquote, programmable mosaics or something that can then respond to that. And then a lot of these questions will be obviously pure security and control, and then really always looking at it, reflecting back through the lens of realistic performance at a public chain scale in a certain number of assets that are owned. So to give a little bit more background, in some work we did last year, we were working with some people in the private equity markets. And in doing some of the designs, the question is always like, wait, what do you do on-chain versus off-chain? And so at some level, you can say, hey, these regulated assets, at the end of the day, are controlled private systems, right? Even though the system of record for the assets might be running on a public blockchain. Now, is that optimal? No. Is that the reality of where we sit today in a regulated world? Yes, right? Like, you're not going to do a security token in the US by having a completely, quote unquote, decentralized, trustless system. It's just not going to work, right? At least as it stands today. So the balance is what kind of features can we impose that are cryptographically sound, that are performant and scale with, desired public chain scalability. And kind of that's the kind of mindset. So that's a super long-winded answer of, yes, this current setup of metadata does not bring any specifics in of how mosaics can like cancel a transfer if the target recipient has a certain tag or something. that's something we want to bring up as a subject, and then assign that as a programmable Mosaic improvement proposal. Again, we haven't, other than light mentions, we haven't really dug into that yet because we're still trying to just move the metadata stuff itself forward. Again, tightly coupled. So hopefully, again, long-winded answer, but does that kind of help paint the picture of the kind of state of things with that?
It's clear to me.
Okay, nice. So through that kind of spewing of information for everyone else, anyone else have like questions or comments with everything I just kind of responded to with that? Particularly around kind of how people see. Again, there's kind of, again, I've had some conversations with some of you independently in the past, and then obviously the verified token framework stuff for you, Dave, and Kaylin and stuff, and the EU guys. So I guess anyone have any other this on the subject of metadata and its influence on how mosaics can interact with it? Questions, comments.
To be honest, I'm still getting up to speed enough probably to be able to ask any useful questions, Nick. So as they come to me, I'll jump in. But yeah, to a certain extent, I'm still trying to catch up.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, so the basic, like essentially we had our own kind of knowledge and ideas, and then, it was essentially decided, let me actually flip over to this. It was essentially decided that, we could get involved into the verified token framework. So you'll see, NEM's logo here, and we kind of gave a verbal handshake to say, hey, we will work towards supporting this sometime.
I've signed the contract and paid the bill for it. It was me that brought it up.
Yeah. So, so some of this influence is coming from like, hey, to meet the minimum kind of required feature set for the verified token framework, we don't need programmable mosaics. It can be a combination of on-chain and off-chain. The desire, of course, is to do as much on-chain and as much from a, let's say, I don't like using the term, but from a quote-unquote decentralized, where everything's just controlled at the account level. So there's not some centralized authority, even though in all regulated cases there will be, essentially, right? But the question is, how far can we push it? So this verified token framework, Jeff, I don't know how much have you consumed this content at all, like either the little white paper write-up or any of this information?
Yeah, I mean, some of it I've gone through and read it, and I'm super excited, and I think this is an important way forward. So that's why I want to help contribute. I'm so far I'm okay with the general concept. I'm just really lacking on the specifics of how we make this happen internally, as far as how do the transactions work. So
yeah, I mean, so again, like if you look at it, potentially incrementally, something I'm not. Again, when I say incremental, yes, if we snap our fingers and everything magically works tomorrow, we have this system that everything is essentially on chain. You can tag accounts and assets, and that acts as like programmable input to block someone from, receiving an asset, right? And then there's other things that, potentially from a quote unquote programmable perspective that we can look at. So yes, if you say that like we can do that, that of course is the goal. But if we look at it from like an incremental standpoint, so the realities are in like a regulated world that we live in today, like you're going to have, regulated exchanges, regulated broker dealers. And it's not this pie in the sky decentralized crypto world for regulated assets that people are like, hey, we don't need regulators, we don't need anyone. We can just like spin up an account, generate a key pair, and start transacting, right? It's like, no, you still got to do KYC, you still got to get approved by some authority. So that's always going to be the case pretty much forever if you're in regulation land. So then it becomes the notion of, in a non-optimal world, living in regulated land where there's one or more central authorities that are really controlling things, both from a asset, generating and distributing the assets, as well as controlling exchanges and whatnot. You then get in a world where essentially things kind of look more like they do today with exchange accounts, right? When you go to an exchange, like you don't control that key, right? It's your account, but the exchange is basically controlling the key once you transfer funds into it and you start trading, and then you withdrawal. So a lot of these regulated asset places and custodians and stuff like that are going to behave the same way. So this kind of, if we can't achieve full optimal scenario from a functionality standpoint, you then start looking at like coordination and management of multi-sig accounts, basically, right? And you start looking at where sign off and authority and approval of transfer or non-transfer happens essentially off-chain with logic based on metadata and account data that's on-chain. So again, let's say a stupid trivial example. I don't have a certain metadata tag. Someone tries to send me something, some asset that I shouldn't be able to get. They send it, but it's waiting for some authority to sign off on like the, 2 of N to like approve it, right? It's kind of like the authority signer. And it just looks at the data in the system and it's like, well, this account you're trying to send to doesn't have the metadata tag that is defined to be allowed to send it. So we're just going to like essentially cancel this. We're not going to sign it.
One question, Nate, because I think that, Jeff also asked the same question in the Slack, and basically we already have some of these ideas also in the access control doc. Wouldn't you think it's a good idea to make that more accessible to everybody who may be interested in contributing to this working group? Because basically a lot of the primary use cases and also some new edge cases that were not considered in the VTF, like those will be in there already, and based on that it's quite I wouldn't say it's straightforward to define what's needed for the first iteration, but it's a lot easier than if we basically if we do the broad approach again, like it's more simplistic if you go from the VTF plus some additional basic requirements and try to find the primary use cases based on that. And metadata condition is already one of those, right?
Yes, exactly. Right. So that's the goal, where we kind of want to say like, well, we have at least some basic idea of how the metadata stuff's going to fall out. The bigger question is kind of like, how is quote unquote some notion of evolved programmable mosaics going to fall out over the next 4 months or something. And but in the meantime, we can kind of say like, well, here's the tools we have today, and then here's the tools we pretty much know we're going to have in the near future, and we can kind of start moving with that mindset and then continually sculpt it down, right? So yeah, I think it definitely makes sense. Some of the improvement proposal was taking snippets from that original doc that we were all iterating on. So probably what we should be doing is linking out to that doc and then moving more content into the improvement proposal, and then having the core conversation there and then the casual conversation on the Slack. So actually, can you, if on the meeting notes doc, can you throw the link in there?
The original link is from the, what is it called? Feature freeze. So it's not publicly accessible, but I can just put it in there, and we just copy paste the doc and make it publicly accessible.
Yeah, I would throw it kind of like with a lot of the content, pretty much all the content that we're dealing with any of these kind of community efforts and meetings and whatnot. If you want, just copy and paste it into a new doc. Pretty much everything we do, it's kind of assumed that like it's kind of editable by community participants. Typically people are just leaving comments or just reading, and that can
just a doc that has few access, few comment access, right? Like link sharing with comment access.
That's probably fine at a minimum. Yeah. Typically we're posting everything with just like full edit, so people. We do that for all of our notes and stuff and other shared docs. But I think it's fine if we have view and comment to start with. The reality is we want to take like stuff like this. We want to reflect back into one or more improvement proposals and have the core kind of conversations going on there, with meetings like this and Slack is kind of like the casual banter of like, hey, how do we move this forward? So we can kind of iterate. So yeah, actually, let me do this. Put that there.
For the metadata, there was also, I think, quite a good discussion on GitHub. So the question is if it makes sense to break this up into more digestible pieces that can be discussed on GitHub. Because I don't know, how useful is it to have all of these Google Docs then again, if we are trying to work towards a NIP? and the nibs all live on GitHub.
That's what I was just referring to. Like we can have this doc as a reference, but we want to move the core pieces into GitHub.
Yeah.
So I mean, whether it all goes into metadata and or we say, hey, maybe there's some other improvement proposals that make sense, such as programmable mosaics and some stuff reflects back in there. That's where we want core stuff to go. I think it's fine having links out to like reference material, but we definitely want like core features and discussion to happen on the GitHub as like the system of documented record and conversation. The Slack is kind of considered to be more day-to-day casual banter and like conversation. We don't use that as any sort
Nothing you'd look up.
Yeah. And then we use just link shared docs for kind of reference and kind of and everything, right? So I would say it's fine to have the doc as like a core reference, and then we just copy pieces into either the metadata improvement proposal, and then if we create some updated new kind of let's call it programmable mosaics one, we can reflect some of that content in there, and then anything else, right? Whether it's 0 or n more improvement proposals that show up. That's definitely where we'd want it to go over time, but that's good. So let me pause there for a second. We kind of just, went for a while on the metadata stuff. And I kind of touched on the verified token framework as kind of like, let's say a heavy influencer on kind of at least I look at it as a beacon, and then this kind of segues into quote unquote NEM public network beta timing, right? So we want to, all of this stuff, just like with all the features, we want to support it and in the core tech, and then the public network, and the community will figure out obviously its own timing and feature set and all of that, right? So there's kind of like parallel conversations about, hey, when do we want to be targeting the public network launch? What features do we want to launch? What's the cadence of updating, which is kind of be somewhat organic. And then in the meantime, besides known features, stuff that's in like this doc that you just shared, Paul, we kind of are using the VTF stuff as kind of like, think of it as almost like a beacon. It's kind of like, hey, it's like a known target that we want to accomplish. Now, one or more orgs or partnerships might pop up between now and the next few months, and that might add a complementary or a secondary target and goal for delivery. But right now, these are kind of the knowns. We know what you guys have been, kind of doing some research and talking to folks in the EU team. There's the VTF effort, and then we know just general internal, thinking about the metadata stuff. So that's kind of like a quick state of things. I guess for the EU guys, you guys want to just maybe take a couple of minutes and just, give a quick, update on kind of your experiences and conversations in the past, few months as you've been kind of going, sure, working with people and getting some feedback and stuff.
Julian, do you want to do that? If not, I will.
You can go ahead. I don't mind. I will just add something if I have something to add. Yeah,
sure. So, well, the whole thing, I think it started in October, actually. So basically, the whole STO working group that we ran, it includes a couple exchanges, some lawyers that are actually working in this field, and companies that are going to issue. So those are the three interest groups. And those three interest groups obviously have different demand based on what they need to solve. And for the exchanges, it's actually quite simple most of the time because, obviously GSX and through GBX, the blockchain-based entity, they already have the regulated background, but lots of them are actually just starting to apply for MiFID II licenses and that kind of stuff. But basically, they really make it simple for themselves, and they try to do, they try to touch as few points as possible, but they understand that all of this will be in the regulated space. So expect that there's very additional functionality besides that issuance is probably going to fall into the hands of the exchange or a broker. So that's actually the least interesting part, in my opinion. The more interesting part is actually how the companies are going to do it, because the way we see it is that they are really not in a position to do it themselves. Like for ICOs, it was possible to do it yourself, and now it's not, more or less. And well, depending on the lawyer you're talking to, that also changes quite a bit. And the way this is probably going to happen is that you will have the companies, you will have the accredited investors, you will have a broker, and you will have an exchange. And the broker will most likely service the companies. The exchange will actually do the hard work in the background. Usually traditional exchanges, KYC per exchange. It's unlikely that there will be federated whitelists. That's something that is, in my opinion, quite different from the VTF. So at least in Europe, the expectation is that there won't be federated whitelists because most banks are not allowed to do that, and actually exchanges as well. So basically, they all need to do their own KYC. And then, well, basically, you have the typical stock broker setup, more or less. Like it's really anticlimactic if you think about it for this case, but that will be the first major mainstream approach. And then obviously you may go into a more flexible approach where you have the self-regulated entities, like in Switzerland they're already trying that, and depending on the app. But in general, it's very, very similar to the traditional stockbroker setup. And the only innovation that is most likely going to happen anytime soon is that right now for stocks you need a CSD for settlement, and the CSD is a layer that can be innovated. So we have one company that is working with it's not public info, so I shouldn't probably mention the names in this call. But they're working with a major exchange on building the CSD layer on blockchain, which would actually enable a lot more flexibility for the exchanges that work with these guys, so that you can have a more secure experience where you can enable or allow the user to have more control over their holdings compared to the traditional stock setup. Because the traditional stock setup basically doesn't have any control over the asset. It's all in custody, and custodians have the full control. We actually will provide a report that will also go to all the participants. I think it was around 20 participants in total. And it's like around 30 pages. And I think we should, I don't know what the best way is to dissect it and to put it into, info for this, or if we just share it publicly. Originally, not everybody wanted to have their input publicly shared, so we need to check if that's possible. But it should definitely be discussed in the working group, I think, because it has some nuances on the VTF and some additional requirements based on European demand and laws. But that's more or less the middle long version of this. Maybe Julian wants to add something.
So I've been writing this report for the last couple of days or weeks, actually. And since there's so much new regulation coming up, new exchanges popping up, there's always something new in there, which will always be updated. But the current version, I think we can share early next week. And I think that's the best actually then to share more information, because I have like information on regulation. Actually, in the last weeks, I also looked into regulation in the US. Then there's like about the edge case scenarios, more stuff to talk about. And just like with you not having the report, it is a little hard to actually go into detail.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I kind of just put a little like next steps of sharing of report stuff, and I think it's fine. I mean, as you guys learn about talking to the people about names and stuff, in like the worst case scenario, we can maybe just generate a PDF and just black out redacted stuff, or we can just do some like minimize summarization of it. People like, hey, don't put my name in the report or something, whatever, right? It doesn't really matter whether it's a little or it's just verbatim shared.
I mean, basically we had two large questionnaires, and right now there's not many of like direct quotes. It's really a generic report about the status quo in the industry, also including, for example, what the other approaches are. I've listed all of them, how they are different, how they are similar, And in the end, they are quite similar, basically having an ERC20 token plus some kind of verification regarding the more restrictions in the different jurisdictions. So it's all really similar, a little bit different in what is on-chain, what has to be off-chain, but that is actually the implementation, which is also decided by the exchanges who will use it in the end. But yeah, I think we can talk more about this next week then.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, thanks for providing the updates. Yeah, I guess anyone have any questions for you guys about any of that stuff? Okay. So yeah, I guess I mean that was kind of all, kind of like a quickish intro and kind of state of things that are driving us. Again, I look at the VTF stuff and where we're at with the metadata thinking is kind of like our current, beacon that we're moving towards. And then as we, either get more input and get a little bit further on the tech side. So I mean, just kind of on the releasing side of things. So we're currently moving towards the Dragon release. So there will be no metadata stuff in the Dragon release. The Dragon release is mostly, not entirely, but it's almost entirely like infrastructure under the covers, improvements and updating, and think of it as more prep work for public networks. And then the Elephant release would be probably the first release that would manifest some or I definitely won't say all, but let's say some or most of the core metadata features. So we're looking at, we're in March now. So Elephant would probably come potentially, I can't say for sure because we're also inserting some dot releases, but let's say, May, June timeframe. And obviously, the ongoing conversation about, from Dragon to Elephant as the foundation and the community look at towards the public network launch, that's not mutually exclusive of kind of doing prototypes and development work of any of the security token or the VTF stuff, right? We can develop and build that. Obviously, the goal is to get it deployed and delivered on the public network, but we can build it on test networks and private networks for demos and kind of carrying the conversations along. I know, Dave, from like a conversation, we had kind of just said like, we agreed to deliver something to you guys that's functional while these other, 100 things are being figured out in the background on public network and timing and feature set, right? And also some of this might time, I assume, I think it's too far off, but some from like a PR perspective, right? Some of this might time with, later in the year, certain either events or other happenings with some other organizations and relationships that don't exist today or aren't finalized today. So those are some other things.
Yeah, so we do have access to those guys already if you need them through a couple of partners in the VTF. So if we wanted to put PR out, the lack of that relationship today wouldn't stop it going out. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. So basically, it's I think as we can there's kind of a bunch of parallel tracks that are all intertwined.
Cool.
But like for instance, like conversations we've had on other technical topics is, hey, there's like some cool features that like metadata will introduce. And while it adds a little bit of extra engineering work, there's some stuff you can do just programmatically to say, hey, this is like our STO library, or this our asset library that's on top of just the core SDK. And while all the features aren't there, we're kind of doing some magic under the covers, assuming how the interfaces are going to play out. So there might be some demos and functional stuff that can be delivered ahead of time. So like if we know that nothing official is going to be like launched on public chain until July, August, or whatever. Some of that's also going to be just dependent on the cadence of public, beta network to production network, right? That kind of has to happen organic. You can't really force that. But anyways, what I'm saying is, there's some things we can do technically to say, hey, the functionality is kind of here. There's some stuff moving under the covers, but you don't need to worry about it right now. And then stuff is just kind of swapped out as features and stuff gets upgraded, but the interface and the core functionality kind of looks the same. I mean, I think it's definitely too early to commit to it and say that's what we're going to do, but I think in the coming month or two, it's very similar to conversations we've had on what do you call it, non-fungible assets. So there's no true simple notion of doing it, of schema or non-fungible. So it's like, hey, but you can kind of build an interface that does it, and then as features are there, you can kind of swap them out. So this can kind of maybe fall under that too, as we see how things progress with the release schedule. But yeah, so that was kind of all I kind of wanted to throw together. Some of it was just obviously to get, all the interested people kind of together and just starting to like move a group conversation forward. And then we can go from there. So typically what we've been doing with the other groups, we kind of say, hey, let's do weekly meetings unless we don't need to, right? And I think, probably this group won't be weekly, like, 4 times a month. Maybe it makes sense next week or the week after. It seems like the next milestone, because the metadata stuff is a little bit out in the future, would be maybe whether it's next week or the week after, guys, for Julian and Paul. Like, the timing doesn't really matter. Like, whenever you guys, kind of say like, hey, we want to present kind of like some of the findings in the report and whatever, right? That would probably be a good organic milestone to hold the next meeting. If that's going to be next week, great, we can do it next week. Else we can target 2 weeks from now or whatever. Again, we want to kind of do these as regular as possible to keep, interest and momentum and bring other people, right? Because like what we see on the other groups by doing like regular meetings, even if they're kind of like light on content, is, the first meeting will have 2 or 3 people. The second one will have 7 or 8. Now, for certain groups, we're at like, 10, 15, 20 people that hop on. So this one I hope is the same, right? We're 5 people today, hopefully over the next 2 or 3 meetings. It's not that like more is better, but it's good. You have more voices, more input, more ideas, right? Not only going into specific security token stuff, but the metadata features and any other feature, right? It's always better to have more and different voices, right? Because everyone kind of comes at it from their own angle, even if there's some overlap. So yeah, that's kind of all I really had on my end. Anyone else have any parting questions or comments?
I think the next week meeting makes sense. I don't know if you want to already fix that, but we actually have, we want to deliver the report anyway. So I think for that, it makes sense next week. And then because there are probably some days in between to look at it and then basically discuss at the end of next week. And then obviously afterwards, it will depend on a lot of other input as well, right? But yeah, just for the next one, that makes sense, I think.
Okay. So yeah, so if you guys have a certain day in mind, like if you're like, hey, doesn't matter to us, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we can pick a day. If you like, basically what we don't want to do, or what I don't want to do, is be like, let's do it on this day, and you guys have to like move other stuff around sometimes it's nice to have forcing functions. So basically, whether it's literally right now or in the next like 3 days or 2 days, sooner the better, but you guys maybe propose something you feel comfortable with. So if you say, hey, next Wednesday seems good, or next Thursday, and then probably what we'll do, we haven't locked the other meetings yet. So typically the other meetings have typically been scheduling out at 2 p.m. Pacific time to accommodate. It's late in Europe and it's early in Asia, but everyone can kind of hop on. Today we have another standard meeting at 2, so I wanted to get this one in earlier. So so that's how it mapped out at this 12:30 time. We can maybe do that again, since most of the people, technically all the people so far that I've interacted with that are interested are in US and EU time zones. So we can we'll discuss this on the Slack, but why don't, Paul and Julian, you guys just kind of say like, yeah, sure, Wednesday, Thursday seems fine. Then everyone else can kind of chime in and we can kind of like quickly slot in a day.
Thursday's usually easier for me, guys. So actually this time or like a couple hours from now on a Thursday is usually pretty easy to get on. Wednesday's a bit harder.
Paul, you're traveling. Are you back next week or? Oops, I think. Are you muted? No. you there, Paul? He's unmuted, but maybe the
Yeah, his audio went a bit funny a little while back. So.
Yeah, let me see chat. Jeff will be traveling all next week. Would you be able to, during your travels, Jeff, kind of like hop on for a call remotely, or are you like?
Yeah, I mean, if it's out at a time, I'll always make time.
Which time zone are you on?
I'll be in Malaysia, Singapore. I'm at a conference there next week.
Okay, so maybe what we can do is then move this one. So let's tentatively plan this next Thursday at 2 p.m. The normal. Well, we can kind of make this like the normal slot. So we've been kind of doing it so that way, Jeff, you don't have to wake up at like 4 a.m. or something like that, right? So if that works for everyone,
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, we can target that. And I think Paul hopped off. Maybe he's going to hop back on to try a new connection. Julian, how does that work on your end?
Thursday is fine for me, so should be good.
Okay. So yeah, we'll tentatively. I'll just make a note here. Next meeting Thursday. Where are we? 21st at PM PST. Tentative. Okay, cool. Alrighty. Well, yeah. Thanks everyone for taking the time to hop on. And
I just had one more thing I was going to add on earlier, mate.
Sure.
The technical release dates you were talking about earlier, and obviously we're not committing to them. That's totally fine. The VTF have bake-offs every quarter, and the first one is happening this month. I'm not sure exactly when, but it's in Bermuda, and the bake-offs are going to run as every 3 months in a different main crypto center. So I'd imagine it's probably, at a guess, going to be something like Bermuda, maybe Berlin or somewhere in Europe, Malaysia, Singapore, probably New Zealand because there's a couple of organizations down there, and then back around. We have a standing invitation as part of the founding membership to attend those things if we want to, either as observers or as contributors or both. So if that's of any use at any point, or we want to run any demos on a beta private chain or something like that, and just start sharing it around with people and get opinions, we're very welcome to go and use that forum. Nice. We've paid for it, so we're in if we want to be there. Nice. And similarly, if anybody just feels like dropping into them, you're more than welcome to take the tickets. Like Ventures guys can't make it across to Bermuda because it's miles away, and we got like a week or two's notice. But if anybody feels like going to Bermuda in March, then it's on.
It's a quick hop from California.
Yeah.
Is a bake-off basically you go in and show what you're doing, your technology? You show it off and do a demo, or what's going on?
I'm not 100% sure, but what I've got to so far is that the first one I think is going to be the Blockchain Labs guys, because most of the VTF stuff came out of TechMe and their tech guys and a couple of the bigger projects that they're involved in already, which is why it was signed in Millbrook in New Zealand. I think the Blockchain Labs guys, who are kind of their version of, I guess, like HE3, but predominantly ETH with a bit of NEM and a bit of a couple other chains, are going to show their implementation of the VTF on, I don't know if it's on-chain or off-chain, but basically however they're going to make it work with ETH. And I think that they're fairly freeform, so because it's a consortium and we're all founding members, we can kind of control it a little bit. So if we wanted one of the bake-offs, I mean, they have rough headlines that Nate had up on the screen there a minute ago on the VTF tab, roughly halfway down the website, that kind of give you vaguely what the theme of that bake-off is going to be. So I think it could be anything from a show and tell to a demo day to a hackathon, depending on what you want it to be.
Nice.
Got it. Yep.
Definitely, we can keep those from like a scheduling perspective for just moving things along. Again, I think it's also good potential forcing functions, right? Obviously, next couple of weeks, no, but potentially, 3 months out, some of the stuff will be there.
That's what I was thinking. If you're thinking sort of May, June, I think the bake-off is probably in June. So it's actually not necessarily the worst point in time. If you want to go 2 tabs to the right from the one you're on just now, Nick,
Oh yeah.
and I think it was about halfway down the website. It's like a kind of a roadmap picture.
Oh yeah, right.
There you go. That was it.
Wait, where is it at? There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bake Off. There we go. Bake Off Q2, Q3, end-to-end platform integration testing.
So I would say the Q3 one, probably for what we're doing, is likely to be pretty attractive. And the second one, multi-blockchain integration, you can imagine us putting a bunch of stuff together into that as well. The first one, I think it's probably not that exciting because it's stuff that like a lot of people haven't done very much on yet. Like I think our time scale is going to broadly dovetail with GBX from what they were telling me, and a couple of other partners on there are not planning on launching stuff in Q1. So I think maybe Q2 and Q3 could be more interesting.
Yeah.
But as I get more information through on it, I'll just share it with you guys, and whoever can get along is very welcome to go along under the banner of them. Like it's
Nice. Cool. Yeah, anything else? I saw you hop back on, Paul. So yeah, basically what we were just saying was
Connection dropped.
we were kind of talking about timings and some people traveling and whatnot next week. So we kind of said, hey, why don't we take the normal 2 p.m. slot next Thursday for the next meeting, and then if stuff comes up, we
Sure.
can adjust or cancel or whatever. Else we'll just plan on that, and then if anything else pops up, again, we're kind of think of the Slack as kind of, even though a lot of us communicate either direct via Telegram or phone or other, the Slack is kind of like community banter and communication, right? It's not meant of a system of record. It's just sharing, communicating, coordinating. Hey, meeting starting, and sharing docs and links that are kind of persisted elsewhere. But we can kind of just conversate on the Slack. Obviously, I've been pinging some of you directly just to give a heads up on stuff. So let's plan for that, and then if anything pops up, we will adjust as needed.
perfect. Cheers to that, Nick.
Sounds
Cool.
good.
Yeah. Have a good day or night, everyone, wherever you're at.
Yep, sounds good.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Likewise,
All right,
guys.
talk
Cheers.
soon. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.